My question for you next comes from chapter 7. In the opening of the chapter, you say, a work of art speaks a truth we can't speak outright, the truth of the human experience. Love, joy, grief, guilt, beauty. No words can communicate these. We can only represent them in stories and pictures and songs. Art is the way we speak the meaning of our lives. And the question that this inspired for us was whether or not literary art played a role in your conversion to Christianity. Some of us have read your spiritual memoir, but not all of us have. So wondering if literary art had a role in that journey. And as sort of a follow-up to that, how coming to Christ changed your craft of storytelling.
Literature was at the heart of my conversion, really. I mean, I talked about the fact that I went and in search of male role models in fiction, feeling that I couldn't find them around me in life. I found these books of detective stories and of the stories of Ernest Hemingway, and all of them had as a subtext the search for the Holy Grail. This is something that they all used. Raymond Chandler wrote about Philip Marlowe as a knight. Dashiell Hammett wrote about Sam Spade on this quest for a Maltese falcon. Hemingway's book, The Sun Also Rises, is completely based on the Grail story. And so I started to read the works of King Arthur, the works about King Arthur, which I loved. I just loved reading about the Knights of the Round Table. And I realized that they were very Christian, and that there was all this Christian symbolism, Christian devotion. The Holy Grail itself is supposedly the cup that Jesus used at the Last Supper. And here I was, a Jew. We didn't have a New Testament in the house, and I started to think, well, I already knew I wanted to be a writer. I started to think, well, I ought to learn about this. This seems to be at the center. Christianity seems to be at the center of Western literature, even when it's not there. Even when it's not there, it creates a central absence, like in the works of Hemingway. So I went out and found a Bible, a New Testament, which I still have to this day. It's falling apart. I kept it on my desk because I was writing my memoir. It's crumbling to dust. And I started to read. I was 15 years old, and I started to read the Gospel according to Luke, because it had the Christmas story in it, and I knew the Christmas story, so I thought that would be a good place to start. And my father, who was kind of a saboteur in my life, we didn't have a very good relationship. He walked in on me reading the Gospel according to St. Luke. And I was 15 years old. It was the 60s. I was already sexually active. He could have walked in on me reading any kind of pornography, or actually walked in on me with a girl, but he walked in on me reading the Gospel according to St. Luke, and he was furious. I look back on it as hilarious because of the things he could have walked in on me doing, but he walked in on me reading the Gospels, and he was absolutely furious. As a Jew, he felt this was bringing the enemy into the house, this was bringing the oppressor into the house, and he screamed at me and wagged his finger in my face and told me he would disown me if I ever thought of converting. And I was trying to explain to him that no, it was actually a literary thing. I wanted to know about this core at the center of literature. And the idea that this was the core of Western literature really haunted me. William Blake, another great romantic poet, said the Bible is the great code of art. And I believe that to be exactly right. And so I read the Bible over and over again, cover to cover. I wrote books about Jesus, but they were completely dismissive books. They were completely, I don't know exactly, debunking books. There were books debunking Jesus, but they were still obsessed with him because I wanted to know this core of art and core of literature. I wanted to own it in some way. And so when I started to realize through simple experience and logic that there had to be a God, it ultimately led me back to this God who had infiltrated my mind by the back door. And one of the things I'm tremendously grateful for is that God, who knew I would never have let him in through the front door, found all sorts of ways to speak to me that I could accept as somebody who was just repelled by the idea of accepting that kind of religion. When I read my own memoir, I thought, oh, wow, he was so obvious. It was so obvious that he was speaking to me. Only I could have been thick enough not to see it. Literature was very important. I was very afraid when I realized I was a Christian, which came upon me quite suddenly, I was very afraid that it was going to turn me into a really crappy writer. I was afraid that I would start to write that horrible, cheerful fiction that I just can't stand. And I should, I have friends who are in these movies and all this stuff, and I just can't tolerate them. I mean, I just, this idea that everything gets great, better. There's one movie where a guy converts and then he gets hit by a truck and everybody goes, oh, thank heaven he converted. I thought the guy's dead. Can't you at least phone his wife before you start thanking heaven? And that cheerful Christian stuff, I just hate it because life is tragic. I mean, life as we know it from cradle to grave is a tragedy. Instead, I found that it made me more realistic, shockingly, which really took me by surprise. Christianity gave me a deeper insight into the human heart and the human spirit, a greater sense of the dignity of human beings, even at their worst, which has really informed my work. I've had a little bit of difficulty because Christians tend to be prigs when they read, and they don't want to read. I write about gangsters and killers and things like that, and you can't really have a gangsters like using euphemisms for the kinds of language that they speak. I remember playing tennis with a guy and losing, and I was just making all these bad hits, and I was shouting, "Oh, doggone it, darn it, darn it!" And he finally stopped the game and came up to me and he said, "Listen, I read your books. There's no darn it in your books. There's no doggone it." And I said, "Well, that's my books." This is the way I actually speak, and so I sometimes feel a little bit alienated from the audience that I'm trying to reach. But at the same time, I feel that the depth of understanding that God has given me is so great that it has moved my work forward in a sensational way. The first thrillers that I wrote before I found God are all about how do you know reality is reality? And the answer to that is, and I couldn't accept that because I was lost in a world of absolute reason instead of the world of life that opens up to you once you find God.